okay with you this morning. I assume my voice is loud enough to hit the back, so I will try to avoid screaming at you. I got a couple people's bits of information, just trying to make sure I understand the organization that you're serving, so I can make this as appropriate as possible. So we have some city government, some public safety, some county government. Anybody that I'm missing in that demographic?
School district.
School district. Okay, very good. So I pulled some content out of here that was somewhat specific towards school districts. So what I'll do is I'll just basically call out to that, and then I'll get you the slide deck that is very specific for K-12 as it relates to this, because there's a big section on digital textbooks and automated rostering and managing personally identifiable information that is fairly specific to K-12, and but I'll make sure I get that to you. So my name is Michael Knight. I'm the President and Chief Technology Officer of Encore Technology Group. Encore was formerly known as Computer Software Innovations, or CSI, out of South Carolina. And effectively, just a quick overview, we were founded in '89. We have about 100 employees. We focus on providing solutions to the public sector, and that's local, county, and state governments, education, higher education. That's what we do. That's our main focus and what we're driving. The Encore Technology Group, we were spun out of Computer Software Innovations when they were acquired by another public company, where I was the Chief Technology Officer and Senior Vice President there. And myself and a few others really wanted to continue driving technology initiatives. The company that was acquiring us back then was just focused on using us as a little cash cow. We decided we didn't want to be that. We want to continue to serve the public. So now, Encore, we have all of the intellectual property of CSI, have driven that forward, and we're very focused in what we do. We are a privately held company now, and we are still very focused on the public sector. So we do a number of different things. We have network infrastructures that we build out. We have network security, physical security, access control, video surveillance, cabling that we do, data center infrastructures, cloud computing, and consultancy. A lot of varied things that are services that are very important for your environment. One thing that I'm going to stay focused on today, we have a platform that we built 11.5 years ago that provides a lot of very important services and brings all of those technologies together. Right? For example, when somebody comes into your environment, how quickly do they get access to all their resources? And resources aren't just file shares, printers, and those types of things. What computer they can sign in. It's also what wireless network they can get on. What content filtering is being applied to them. What external resources, who in here hosts and manages 100% of their apps and uses no cloud or external services? That's the way it is now. You have a lot of services that are outside of your borders. So that's what we're really going to speak to today. And because we have domain expertise in the other areas and the technology integrations and those types of things, I'm really going to help build that together for you and how all of those constructs interview. So to get started, oftentimes people start slinging terms and acronyms without really saying what they are. So we'll do a really quick nomenclature baseline. So when we're talking about user provisioning and resource provisioning, single sign-on, federation, user self-service, there's a lot of different terms that are involved. And the first one is an authoritative source. And what that simply means is your platform where your individual's identity lives. So for school districts, it's a student information system, or an HR. For a local county government, it may be a platform like Munis or an ERP like that. It may even be a payroll platform. This is where, when an individual comes into your environment, an authoritative source is the first place they get entered so that they're now an employee. That's their identity information. This is where the platform that says who they are, what job role they're in, what location they're at, and what their functions are. An authentication account, and this is going to be an Active Directory account for our platform, but this is their main account that they use, or you want them to use, solely to authenticate to everything. And then a resource account. This is going to be a third-party account. This could be anything such as a Office 365 or a Google account. It could be a resource that for school districts that would be a digital textbook. For local, county, and state governments, this may be a authentication to access CGIS information, or something like that, also from the public sector side. And provisioning is the act of taking information from that authoritative source. Let's see if I've got a laser beam here we go. From the authoritative source, we grab that information, we see what's going on, and then we create all of the necessary accounts for that. Federation, it's a security construct, and it's also a protocol that allows two separate environments to establish a trust relationship where one platform trusts the authentication that occurred on another platform. Okay? And I'll get into specifics. I'll get a quick example of that would be Office 365. So if you're federating with Office 365, you never authenticate to Office 365 directly. What happens is Office 365 calls back to your federation server. Your federation server goes, which is running inside of your environment or connected to your environment, authenticates you and sends what's called an assertion back. That means your credentials never actually went to that provider. You just got a validation from your federation server. So we'll get a little bit more into that. And then personally identifiable information. This is information about a specific individual. That might be their location information. It could be their address, social security numbers, anything that can specifically identify that individual. And we're going to talk about how our platform can help control that and keep that within your borders, or keep you in control of it, as opposed to some providers that hook directly into an authoritative source and then just ship that off to other locations. So one of the things that is being bubbled up in the public sector community is the discussion, because there's so many apps, so many users, and everything's changing so quickly, says we're having an identity crisis. Well, it's more of a access, resource, permissions, and management crisis than identity. You know, and if you look at what's up on the slide, what you're going to see is most people, if you start thinking about all the accounts that you have, not only professionally but personally, those numbers aren't shrinking, right? And it always seems to be, well, hey, just add this in here. How many people have a smartphone? We all can raise our hands. How many of those apps use the same username and password for everything? Or the same authentication source? Very few, right? So not only are you managing accounts, but you're managing authentications, you're managing resources just to yourself. If you get beyond that and you look into your environment, how many requests do you get if you're in that specific role to provide more access on a daily basis? Frequent? Fairly frequent? I need new information. I need new applications. Well, what's the best way to roll that out? How can you be assured that when that person, even when they came in, what if they changed roles? Sometimes it's a positive and they're moving up. They need more access. Sometimes it may not be as a positive and they're moving down and now they need less access. Or sideways, and they just need different access. That's really, if you look at the resource sprawl, that's what's occurring in every single environment. And as we noted earlier, most of that is not within your borders, where everything's tied immediately back to your Active Directory domain or whatever your authentication platform is. Because of the type of company that we are, and we have a lot of technology partnerships with Cisco and Aerohive, HP, Dell, and others, I got a little over 60 accounts that I manage for myself. And I have a pretty good memory. I'm not really that good about remembering all my passwords, but more importantly, how do I know that somebody isn't accessing one of my accounts? I've got no central logging going on my platform. And with public sector, this is a call out to education, but this is true of every environment that is hiring individuals. When you look at managing information and where that information exists, and there's actually 31 states that are passing student privacy laws as well as digital privacy laws right now. We did a kind of a case study of a number of our customers, and what we found from the time an individual starts in public education or education and goes through higher ed and then goes into their full-time job, their information has been on at least 20 different platforms. And the authentication around that is not necessarily the same, and there's no way to log where has this person been, what are these accounts still active. And I'll put that question out to you is, when you look at your environments, do you have a automated system today of when an individual gets added into that authoritative source, that HR platform, that ERP, whatever, for them to have all of their accounts created, and not only created, but updated as they move through their environments, and that information logged when they access something. Is that a relevant topic that you're looking to achieve in the platform? Hands yes or no? Okay. And just to ask you this question, as far as the topics that we're covering today, is there a specific thing that you want to hear or understand? Are you just looking for some methodologies around provisioning and deprovisioning and single sign-on? Is that the most of you are here to hear? Is that relevant? Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen some of these single sign-on solutions that have kind of a web interface portal, which to me, the Holy Grail would be some system that's much more invisible to the end users, where credentials are cached. And I don't know if there's any kind of technical or security reasons why that's impractical, or if that's some Holy Grail that technologies are working toward.
That is what we provide, and I'm actually going to walk you through how we've been doing that at a large scale for 11 and a half years. We started off building a platform that would do automated provisioning, resource provisioning, deprovisioning, change control, single sign-on with user self-service. Our first customer was Miami-Dade, and they had 900,000 people 11 and a half years ago. So what we had to do is take the elephant and not just, we couldn't eat it in a lot of little bites. We had to really figure out how we're going to parse this thing out. So what we've done is we've built that platform that you're talking about from a scale and functionality perspective, but we've driven it down as far as price based on it being a subscription or a software as a service model. So I'll walk through some of those things. So back to a couple of these questions. What we were talking about was your authoritative source and your Active Directory and all of these other accounts. They don't run on the same platform. They don't use the same authentication database in most cases, and people change. Something as simple as a name change. If you think about your environment, how long does it take to roll that through every single system? Right? When somebody's role changes, when it's an individual that needs more permissions, they may get those permissions quickly because you may have a script or some type of platform to do that. But then the question is, did you deprovision everything that they didn't need anymore? Right? So just as important as giving new access is taking away access that is no longer needed or required as part of that. And then if you draw the circle around it, how are we logging and auditing what people are accessing? Right? How many people hear, oh, everybody uses that program, and when you actually started looking at it, it's like 5%, right? You're spending money on applications that you don't even need. So the questions and the thought process, and I really want to help you think through some of these methodologies, is when you have disparate platforms, those platforms, you are creating user accounts and putting information in each one of those. That information generally lives in your authoritative source, that ERP, that SIS, the payroll platform, but because those platforms aren't interlinked, you're having to put in that same data over and over again. So obviously user error can occur, but the bigger thing is the time and efficiency to that. We talked about something as simple as name changes, but in organizations that have people that are managing different applications, there's a lot of gatekeepers for those apps. So how can you automate that to where you don't have to go to that specific person and make sure those accounts got created correctly? The other questions that come into that is, how are you controlling access to those apps? So let's say that you've created an account, right, on a third-party web app. How do you actually know if the individual is signing in, and more importantly, that it is that individual that's signing in, and not somebody that just was able to breach their password and those types of things? How are you getting that availability and information when somebody does do a user self-service and a password reset, that it was actually that individual, and that they're not doing it all the time, that there's repetition to that? So our methodology, and I have not even gotten into our product yet, so we're going to leave the product for later. We're really going to talk through the ways to do this, right, so that you can look at it and understand it a little better. Our methodology to do this is enabling this through one logon. Now, there's a big difference between single sign-on and same sign-on. Who thinks that they could tell me the difference between single sign-on and same sign-on? I don't have any prizes, so this
The
is
single
going to
sign-on would be just like one login the first time you get access to everything with the same, and the same site login would be the same username and password for each one of those applications.
That's right. That's exactly right. And what's happening is people are saying that same sign-on is single sign-on. It's not accurate, right? Because in a lot of those cases, it's great to get to same sign-on, right? But oftentimes, same sign-on is just username and password synchronization, which is taking your Holy Grail username and password and shipping it out to all these applications. Which if that third-party application is breached, guess what else is breached? Every other possible app in there, right? And that's why when you talk about security federation, where when there's platforms that support that, your credentials don't live on those platforms. They live within your borders. And you're authenticating that user, and you're the one that's providing the thumbs up, thumbs down, right? And you can also audit and log that. If you don't have a platform that supports federation, if you have automated provisioning that creates those accounts with separate usernames and passwords, but then tie that separate credential back into single sign-on, where that individual never knows what those credentials are, but they're only authenticating with theirs, if that platform is breached, your exposure is minimal, because they only have that very small bit of information. They can't come back into your environment and get access to all of that. So what we talk about as a methodology, I'm a hand talker, so I don't want to take a bath this morning again. What we do is we enable, with federation and provisioning and a few other things, the end user experience is they have only one user ID and password. They only authenticate one time, and that's a key term, is authenticate, right? Because I want that individual to only authenticate one time, but I also may want to have multi-factor authentication given the resource. And I'll talk about multi-factor authentication in just a minute. But one place to go for that. So what's interesting is when most of the apps ran locally, you had shortcuts on the desktop, right? And if it was a web app, you might have a favorite, even have that favorite on the desktop. Now it's a massive sprawl of web apps and some local apps, and if you were to try to put that in favorites, it'd be a big long list of information. So we need one place to access that. Well, in most environments, in small environments, sometimes you can get to where you only have one type of device. But in any environments that have different types of user sets, it may not be possible just to have this site on a Windows platform, an iOS platform, a Mac platform, Chromebooks. There's all of these different components in here. So in order to provide equity to all of your users, you have to provide them an interface that gives them a common experience no matter what device they're on. And that's, an example of that is an HTML5 compatible portal, where no matter who's signing in to what device, they can sign in securely and everybody can see their apps, access them, and be able to have that information logged and then reported or alerted on. So that's the methodology. Now, the reason for that, we covered some of that earlier. Your users are changing, their roles, their needs, the types of applications they need to have access to. This information lives on all sorts of different platforms, and access or instruction in a K-12 case requires everything to be normalized through a standard type of portal. So how we do that in what we call our onboard platform, which ENBOARD, we automate all of the user and resource provisioning. That's all based on as real time as you want that to be, changes done in the authoritative source. And that's not just accounts. And I'm going to get into how provisioning on a light level, that is just usernames and passwords being created into a platform. Almost all platforms now have feature set enablement requirements, like Office 365 is an example of that, licensing and other types of things that happen as part of that. After all of those accounts, both their authentication account, Active Directory account, and all of their resource accounts are created, we're then tying all of those resource accounts back to that authentication account for single sign-on. Now, I'll get into this more in a second, but it's critical to understand where does that credential repository live? Who's comfortable with that? All of their credentials living on a third-party cloud that they can't audit. Sure, why not? Let's, just throw it out there. That's not something that's gonna work. And more importantly, all of these applications and assets, you wanna have control of that authentication process. That's why federation is so important in there. But some platforms don't support that, so we'll get into multi-factor authentication and a couple of other things. And then, if we've reached a near utopia, where all of our user information is automatically provisioned, created, updated, deprovisioned when they fall out of scope, all of those credentials are tied back to one authentication account that supports multi-factor auth, gives them one place to go for all of their information, then we want to be able to, for that given user set, because we want to be specific, we may not want to provide user self-service or password reset for everyone, just maybe for specific types of individuals. We need to have that functionality or ability in the platform. So this is, I'm going to take a kind of a peel the next level of the onion back in not only the methodology, but how our platform embraces that. So if you look at provisioning, and we'll go specifically toward Active Directory, most environments use security groups to manage access to specific resources. Now that security group can control access to a file share. It could control access. It could put you in a group to where that group is tied into your wireless, to where you're being allowed access to wireless. It could be tied into your content filter or your network access control, or it can be tied into an application that's accessing information that is very secure, using that security group as the limiter. When we're talking about Active Directory provisioning, not only does it create the user and put them in the specific organizational unit, but it also puts them in all the security groups and distribution that's required for their role. An example of that could be if they're a public safety officer, they need to be able to access their computer, their laptop in the patrol car. They also need to have an email account created, but they also may need to do lookups. They need access to specific CGIS information. That means that they also have to be on a secured network. We have to validate that what they're coming from is encrypted, and what they're going to is encrypted, and the data in flight's encrypted. It could be an example of a teacher in a K-12 environment where you automatically want to create a distribution list for them for every classroom. Also give them all their digital textbooks, roster all those digital textbooks, and provide that for them, right? So provisioning touches on not only account creation, but also for Active Directory, it's OU placement and group membership access. It is resource provisioning from the standpoint of what third-party apps should they have, what type of interface do we have with that. And as we mentioned earlier, it's not just the creation, it's the change and then deprovision. If the individual leaves or gets moved into a role that no longer requires access to that information. And the one thing that I call it as an example I was touching on earlier is provisioning is not just creating accounts. It's then licensing them, updating them, and even adding features. So if you think about Office 365 example, and Google is the same way. There's an account creation, but there's about probably 20 different sub-apps that you can enable features for. What does that specific user need? Do you want them to have Delve, Sway, Link, and everything? Well, probably maybe for their role, maybe not for their role. And that has to be very specific. After we circle, we complete the first part of the circle, which is that provisioning process, we then get into single sign-on. So if you look at single sign-on, there are platforms that have a same sign-on construct. So you may have an application that supports Active Directory authentication, but do you want that user to then have to hit that and then authenticate again, and then hit another thing and authenticate again? A better scenario would be that you have something that can securely post the credentials to that app. Even if it's the same Active Directory credentials, it could be even an internal website without them having to authenticate over and over again. I'm a pretty good typist. I mistype my passwords when I'm accessing things all the time, right? I've locked myself out, either not remembering or something. How can you reduce help desk tickets and security concerns with that? That's where the single sign-on component comes in. So to walk you through that, after those resource accounts are created, if there's federation that is supported on the platform, Again, federation is those two platforms having a trust relationship, but the platform that has the resources is going to trust that my federation platform that's hooked into my environment and I control is going to authenticate my user, even off their platform through a redirect, and then just give that platform a thumbs up. Again, the importance to that is my credentials don't live on that platform. So after those resources are provisioned, if it supports federation, great. If not, and it has either a different username and password, even uses my AD password, I need a way to post that and push that over there. That's done through our single sign-on portal. We can even do direct links off desktops. Oftentimes these applications have a different username and password. Where does that credential live? Well, what happens is, if you're giving that user let's say it's a web site, has a forms-based field, and they have a separate username and password, what percentage of those people do you think choose yes to save their credentials to that? Almost everybody, right? I'm even guilty of that in some cases, right? So how do we prevent them from doing that, and more importantly, enable them, because if that device that they have becomes unavailable, they're put onto a new device. At that point, they don't have all of those credentials stored. They don't remember their passwords. They're back to square one, right? So what our platform does is when we provision those third-party apps, we take those credentials and we store them encrypted inside of your Active Directory environment. So there isn't a third-party cloud repository that you can't audit or control or know what's going on with it. It's actually stored encrypted inside of your Active Directory, so that just by doing normal Active Directory auditing, you can see who's trying to access those credentials. Now those credentials are encrypted with a two-way key, obfuscated via a set of one-way user permission read, and we make it nearly invisible inside of the platform. In order to breach that, there's 9 levels that somebody would have to do to make that happen, and there's auditing that's stepped all the way through. But the most important component to that is all of your credentials are stored encrypted in your Active Directory and under your control. There's a lot of applications that support different types of federations. You need different native security integrations, and our platform supports all of that. Again, we built this platform before people were really even talking about SSO or federation, so we were well ahead of the game in functionality and feature sets for today's user. Our identity verification system is where we do our user self-service and security onboard, security question management, and those types of things. But getting to the end result, how do we get the user to where they can sign in, single sign-on, one authentication, and see all of their specific apps? Now this is an example of a scaled-down portal for K-12, but it's still relevant for all environments because everybody uses email. Everybody has specific apps that are important in their environment. And the key is not only is it just those apps, but it can be documents, specific URLs, not even necessarily a single sign-on URL, although it can be, but a URL, and get this individual based on who they are in a role, in a location, at a point in time, access to their specific information. And it's not just apps, but it's also files, right? So internal file shares, Google Drive, OneDrive, any third-party type of platform. So the key here is that not only are you automating, so if you look at it from a system side, you're trying to reduce complexity, enable better security, get logging, be able to get some telemetry so that you can do learning analytics or other types of information about what people are using, what they're accessing, what device they're coming from, when they're signing in, where they're signing in from. Our platform has all of that built into it. But the key is, why are you doing that? It's so when the end user goes to access their information, it's right there. And they can click and they can go and they can be effective, and they're not going through 19 steps every time to try to figure out how to get to a specific application. And going beyond that, going beyond apps, and I'll actually pull a couple of other things up in just a second and talk a little bit more about the app side, is the integration with everything else. So with wireless, with security, with information. So when you have a platform like this, and this is just an example of one type of integration that we've done, not only can we provision user accounts, but this is an example integration with Arrowhive, where we can dynamically provision personal pre-shared keys for end users. so they can bring their own device, securely get on the wireless platform, and not have to call IT or whoever to try to figure out how they can get their own device on, right? So it enables security, it audits that, we have that process in control, but that goes beyond the scope of just a application or an asset. Is this information meaningful? I want to make sure that I'm staying on target and giving you the information that you came for. Because this is a big, wide topic that you can go a lot of different areas and take a lot of different roads, and I want to make sure that it's meaningful. The other thing is when you're authenticating, our platform has what's called an identity firewall. What this means is when you authenticate, that when we talked about that one logon methodology, the one username and password, the one authentication, and then the one place for them to see that, at the authentication point, because of there's so many different platforms that you have, you want to be able to do some pre-authentication. So I can authenticate here, and I can pre-authenticate that user into other platforms, locking that back to their IP, or even using it as a wireless captive portal, based on their logon and being able to get them access to different information. The other thing that's part of our platform is we have a little app that you can push out to via group policy to all of your Windows machines, to where right even before they get to where they're signed in, they can reset their password if they've locked themselves out. And that's also the case on Chrome, as well as iOS doesn't have authentication other than a PIN, and then right through our portal, right through our logon on the portal, they can reset their password if they've been given that access based on their group information. So the end result, if you look at the entire process, I like to think about it as either like the water cycle or the recycling arrows. If you start off with and go, well, I just want single sign-on. Well, that's the candy part of the scenario, because until all of those accounts are created with provisioning, you can't have single sign-on, right? You have to create all the accounts, then single sign-on comes into play. Then that one ubiquitous access to all of their information. After that, user self-service, and then as those people change, the information is updated, their apps are updated, they get complete dynamic updates to that portal or even to their Windows desktop if you want to just do shortcuts based on specific apps and those types of things. All of that functions together, and what that means is you have change control. The change control is you have your authoritative source where that information is. The individual that makes that role adjustment has authority to do that. You're taking that information and then you're giving them access to those specific resources wherever they may be. That could even be, to our K-12 example, rostering a new digital textbook because an individual went into a new class, needs that, and then needs that icon to appear in their portal so they can access that digital textbook. It also means that I want to audit. Every time somebody signs in, I want to record where they're coming from, IP address, what type of device they're coming from, what browser they're using, and then also what resources they're accessing. And that can be used for something as simple as license reclamation, which means, am I using these assets? Right? I'm paying for a site license that costs me $50,000. I should have 6,000 people using this. I only have 300. Should I continue to pay for a site license? Probably not. I can tune that down and not overspend. In the case of a digital textbook, oftentimes the providers say, well, you have 5,000 people using this. We only have 3,600 students that match that, right? How can you know are we overusing our licenses? Why? Be able to bring that into alignment. Being able to audit and log when somebody changes their password through the portal. And then most importantly, and this is a, I don't know if this is they call it a soapbox thing or a passion. I like for our customers to be in control of their data. So all of the PII is running on your platform in a SQL database, your personally identifiable information. Your credentials are stored encrypted in your Active Directory environment. Now you can run those in a cloud frame, right? You can have those assets in Azure or AWS that you still have your arms around and you're auditing and logging. But the key is you're in control of that. So I know it's early, and I want to make sure that I'm not keeping you too long, so I want to give you some time for Q&A. But really what our focus is to provide not only technology solutions, be it network infrastructures, network security, physical security, all of the cabling required around that, data centers, unified communications, we have a hosted voice platform. We do all of these different things, but really what I wanted to provide for you today was how you can automate your user access to information, whether that's local or whether that's cloud. I want to help you to understand that we have a lot of domain expertise in all of those areas so that we know how to bind those together. And then really have a discussion with you about, do you have a specific challenge that you're trying to overcome? And maybe our platform is the right fit. It's very extensible and flexible, but even if it's just you have questions, we do work with a lot of local county, city governments, state government entities, K-12, higher ed. We can potentially just be a resource for you to throw information at. From a local county government, from a public safety perspective, we've helped a lot of public entities come into CJIS compliance, and through all sorts of different, whether it's technology solutions or just building business practices. So I appreciate your time this morning, and any questions that you have for me, I'd be happy to answer at a group level or one-on-one. Was this session helpful? Was there anything that you were hoping to hear that you didn't hear?
I do have a question.
Yeah.
From a standpoint, we've got internal apps, we've got a few hosted web apps. We've got some apps that use AD authentication, we've got some apps that use local authentication. We've got internal users. We also have like a citizen self-portal, where we're starting to do a lot of e-services. And some of those apps, like we've got one particular public stuff, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. So we do like a secure LDAP lookup from the web back to us. Well, all of our citizens that want to use this, they have to go in and sign up. Well, if we launch another service, that means they're going to have to sign up again. And if they go through our HR policy, a little module to do application, I want to apply for a job, there's another username and password.
Right.
So with this, what I'm hearing is fit all of that?
In most cases, yes, we actually we used this technology, we developed a portal for the South Carolina Department of Employment Workforce, and it basically would do, when a applicant would apply for specific resources, our platform could then take that information and inject that into all of the other platforms based on what they were doing. And then when they would sign into the portal, they would only use that one username and password. But then when they would click on one of those other apps, it would send the actual other credentials into that, and they wouldn't even know what that was.
So at that point, you're pretty much publishing apps to them that they maybe didn't even know existed.
And based on what they selected as part of their application process, you can make sure that they have those resources and information in front of them.
So we've got a password reset tool, but single sign was something that's been a topic.
Yeah, and single sign-on, it's so important, not only from a ease of use, but also, again, from security. Is it, everybody knows what the answer is. Is it faster to disable one account or 92 accounts, right?
So where does your app reside?
It can reside 100% on-premise, in a hybrid cloud, or hosted. But even when we host it, it's all done in Azure, which is CJIS compliant. So our hybrid is where you're running on-prem and failing over to an Azure cloud, CJIS compliant, which also meets FERPA guidelines. And then if you're doing hosted, it's an Azure partition. If you already have an Azure partition, that's where you would want to host all of that in. We can provide it through that as well. Typically, the platform is deployed on anywhere from, depending on how big you want your dev environment to be and a couple of the other things, it's anywhere from like 3 to 6 virtual servers, and we support VMware, Microsoft Hyper-V, and Citrix Zen Server. It's supported on KVM, but we don't have expertise in KVM, so if you're running that, you're on your own.
License based on number of user accounts active at any given time?
So it's based on the amount of individuals that you want to be managed by that. So let's say that you have 15,000 Active Directory accounts, but of those, the individuals, it may only be 10 that are in there that you actually want to be managed. They're going to have provisioning, single sign-on, and all those types of things. It's going to be licensed on the people that are actually going to use the platform. Because obviously you have service accounts, and you potentially have accounts that a long time ago you're just having to keep for specific reasons. You know, you can't deprovision those yet. Our platform has a mechanism we call tombstoning and deprovisioning, so we walk them through that deprovisioning cycle as well.
So speaking of service accounts, is there any automation if you want to change that every 90 days where you, as an administrator, you go into the portal area and then it would send out an update to whatever server may have those services starting under that account?
So there are mechanisms to automate the password change to a specific algorithm. And then because our platform is extensible, we could actually script. So that's not something we do today. I can tell you how we would do that. Effectively, you could specify specific servers in that script that would be part of a given group, and then you could effectively just do a PowerShell script that would go out and update that on that platform. But you can even, I mean, there's all sorts of ways to use different algorithms to have a password that is extremely complex, and even have that to where it could be security emailed somewhere as well, so that you would know what that was. It could have that logged to a specific database. So that in the event that something, scripts always work, right? So in the event that it didn't work, you'd actually know what it was changed to and could roll it there and update it.
I have a question.
Yep.
It's too early, so I think I'm trying to understand this.
Sure.
So you said simple sign-on is different than
So same sign-on?
same sign-on and single sign-on,
Yes.
right? So I sign in with one login
Mhm.
and password, and I have access to 10 other. How are you taking this login and password and
And sending it
making
off?
different, making
Sure,
it different
yeah.
for each application?
So this is where the provisioning aspect comes in. So if you think about this, a lot of these applications either do not connect into AD, aren't LDAP aware, they have a separate username and password. So we can provision those applications. Now provisioning can be as ornate as they have, that provider has an application program interface or an API or an SDK, software development kit, that we can integrate with them. It can be as middle tier as they have a, what's called a batch user creation or update. That can be something like a CSV file that we can send over to them, the provider they can pick up. Or it can be as rudimentary as we're manipulating a ODBC tables in that database, right? Once we create those credentials, we know, our platform knows what those credentials are. We take those and we store those encrypted in AD. How we do that is we create a child object underneath your user object. So if you look at your AD structure, you've got OUs, and then it's coming down to your specific user object, which is a container CN. Underneath that, we create child objects for each one of those credentials that we've created. Encrypted with a two-way key, so when we use a permission read and obfuscate it, so it's completely hashed out. I mean, it's not even, you know, even if somebody was trying to look for something, it would be not even obvious what that was. And if you wanted a security deep dive and what somebody would take a breach, I'd be happy to talk to you about that. But effectively, what happens then, let's use an example up here, Moodle, right? So when that individual, now if you look at the Moodle page, it's a forms-based page, right? They don't support federation. So what happens is when that user clicks on Moodle, our SSO platform, because it was your user that authenticated, uses your user authentication, goes to that Moodle credential that existed under your user, pulls those credentials, and then securely passes that over to that provider with 256-bit SSL encryption. So it takes that those credentialing information that's not the same as Active Directory, or it could be, passes it over to that provider, and then you're authenticated. And what's happened along the way is when you sign into the portal, we recorded your user, the IP address where they came from, where they signed, what type of device they were using, what type of browser they were using. And then whatever they click on, we record that as well, so you can actually go back and run reports and see what people are accessing as part of that.
So what happens if I lose that one password?
So then right from the portal, you can go, if you forgot it.
No. Say someone else is logging in, has
So-
one login and password,
Yeah.
they have access to all.
So that's where multi-factor authentication comes in. So there's applications here that it's somebody else signed in as you and was accessing Discovery Ed, who cares, right? But what about the ERP system or the student information system and those types of things? So we have what we call a confidence engine. So you can enable it at the application level if it has confidential or information that needs to be additionally secured in there, when they click on that, we do either a new page pop-up or just a modal pop-up on the screen, and it requests additional information. Now, that additional information can be information that we're pulling from the authoritative source, such as enter your employee ID, enter your staff ID, student ID, enter your 6-digit birthday, right? Any of that information. So once they enter that correctly, only then will that application come up. And then the portal has timeout variables and everything else built into it as
So
well.
we do have to have an additional key.
Depending, right? So it's not necessarily an additional key per se, it's additional information that individual has to provide. But you can enable that again for application. We also, our platform is location aware, so you can have a behavior for an app be one way if they're accessing it from internal, or behave differently if they're accessing it from an external location.
So I'm using a similar product, but some of the SaaS applications, do password resets
Right.
in 9 days,
Yep.
whatever. So my staff creates the account,
Mhm.
but then the maintenance becomes an issue.
So how we get around that is through provisioning. So our platform can not only do provisioning at a grand scale, but it can also do it. And for example, let's say that you have a web app that the password expires every 30 days, and they start notifying the individual at the 25th day, right? You want to avoid all of that. So what we do for that specific app, when we set it up in the provisioning timer, we have it do a user password change. For that, when we're provisioning, we provision a new password for that individual, and then we automatically inject that when we change it into the SSO credentials, so that individual never has to update or change that password.
What if you haven't been able to use the API or to
So-
integrate?
So
or
even if it's
not
just a
generated?
CSV file, that for some of those, or depending on,
Or we actually
manually create them.
We manually created the account because we don't have.
there's no mechanism for that. So when you,
Like state applications.
Sure. okay, so on a state application side, what you can do is when you create that, we can give you a specific CSV file to put that information in, and then we can direct inject that into our SSO portal, to where that credential for that individual is securely encrypted and built in there. So when they go and click on the state app, then they can do that. The other thing we can do,
But then the state app. is
Right.
not.
so then the other thing we can do is what's called a user-managed or a one-time setup app. What that means is, you, from a management perspective, can either set up the first password, but you can give that user the ability to change it as their password changes. So when they click on that link, let's say that, for example, you set it up for them, but you have what's called a user, I'm trying not to get too technical with our product, you enable what's called interactivity with the credential. And what happens is, if that's an app that you don't have an ability to provision, you set it up the first time for them, but it's going to expire in 30 days. When it expires and they click on that app, our SSO will see that the authentication did not occur correctly, and then it'll say authentication failed, please update your password. At that point, they can either click and go to that app and then change their password there, or in the bottom right-hand corner you see update my credentials. When they click on that, they'll see that app in there, they can click on it and then put in the new credentials that they just changed for that. So that's an interactive app. There's a lot of applications and that's a good example where you're not necessarily either managing it long-term, sometimes not even at all, right? You want to give them SSO to a state reporting site, but they have to set up their username and password separate from you. You're not even able to set that up for them in some cases. And then they can go in, the first time they click on that app, we pop up a window that says enter your username and password for that app. When they enter that in there, again, it doesn't store it in their browser, or locally, or some third-party frame. It stores it encrypted into Active Directory. So then they can go over to if they're using their laptop, they can go to their iPad, hit your portal, click on that app, and get SSO to it.
So would an external user have to have an Active Directory account at that point, instead of like a citizen?
So if you're looking at it from a citizen perspective, there's actually a different way to do that. You can either have it to where you're bucketing them in a separate AD environment, or there's ways to use it's Active Directory and application mode, or lightweight Active Directory. There's a couple of different ways to accomplish what you're looking to do versus what.
Because you don't want that thing to go against your
Oh, yeah.
Microsoft license and.
Yeah,
cause all-
no, absolutely, yeah. In your case of a web app, we actually built that in an entirely different environment as far as the credentials went than from your internal systems. But because we can do federation and multi, cross forest, cross AD, you can still allow people to come from go to the same place and get access to information. Good questions there, keeping me on my toes already. Any other questions? So to summarize, this is something that we've been doing for 11 and a half years. We're not new to the provisioning or the SSO story. Our platform is built to scale, but from a pricing perspective, it's built based on your number of users. Our base SKU gives you up to, depending on the SKUing that you're using, it can be a 7,500 or 10,000 as your user base, and then above that, it's a per user cost. We're here. We're headquartered in Greenville, South Carolina. Your account reps are actually sitting in the back row there, Danielle Stengel and Mike Ingram. You can wave your hand so people know who you are. There you go, thank you. But we're in the state. We have a lot of customer references here in North Carolina, as well as the whole East Coast and nationally as well. So I'd be happy to talk to you about anything, whether it's this platform or even getting back to some of the other things that we're doing. Do a lot of different things. So we're happy to talk to you about any of that, including even the CGIS compliances and those types of things. So thank you for your time.
I didn't think it was that day.
I was talking to you right now.